It's hard to believe that we're actually on May 4th, 2022. May the 4th be with you. I don't know how it's already the middle of spring. Last week we commemorated Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, and we thought that it would be appropriate to read a book this month and to talk about a book this month that reflected on the Holocaust, on the story of the Holocaust. And I can think of no better story to talk about and no better author to listen to this evening than Silvia Foti, who wrote the book, The Nazis' Granddaughter: How I Discovered My Grandfather Was a War Criminal. I want to just tell you a little bit about our author. Silvia Foti is a journalist, a creative writer, teacher, and mother. She holds master's degrees in journalism, education, and creative nonfiction, and she's been a journalist for 20 years, has published 2 mystery novels, and has been a high school English teacher since 2007. With a master's in journalism from Northwestern University, Silvia has extensive experience in writing nonfiction and has written for a variety of publications, including the Chicago Tribune, Southtown Economist, Southwest News Herald, Crain's, Chicago Business, Chicago Parent, LA Parent, Buenos Aires Herald, and Argentine News. And so, I mean, it's a much longer bio. Feel free to go to her website, which I think is silviafoti.com, all eyes in her name. I think Silvia and I were talking a little bit before the program started, and she said that we were talking about that as a high school teacher. She teaches seniors, and she helps seniors prepare their college application essays. And what she said was, what she told me was, she tells her seniors that they should pick your moments of pain and the obstacles that they've had to overcome and write about them. And I thought that was so ironic, because in some ways, Silvia, that's what you did with this book. And so I want to turn things over to you to talk about this unbelievable book an unbelievable story that you've written. And thank you, everyone. Please help me welcome officially Silvia Foti.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. I'm so happy to be here with your group. I've got a little PowerPoint that I'm going to go through, and then it'll take about 40 minutes or so. And then after that, I'll be happy to take some questions. So I'm going to try to share screen. Okay, here we go. Trying to get the slideshow started. All right, this is working. Okay, so I'm from Chicago. You can't tell from my accent. And author of The Nazis' Granddaughter: How I Discovered My Grandfather Was a War Criminal. So I thought I would start off talking a little bit about Lithuania. Not everybody's familiar with this tiny country in Europe. It's about the size of the state of Virginia. So you could see that it borders the Baltic Sea. You could take a ferry to Sweden from it. Poland is to the south. Belarus is to the east. You could see Ukraine, which of course is in the news, is not very far. Many Lithuanians are hosting Ukrainian families right now. You could see how close Russia is, considered an enemy of Lithuania. Germany was once an enemy of Lithuania. Poland was once an enemy of Lithuania. So this is where Lithuania is now. I'll give you very, very brief history of Lithuania, 1,000 years in like a minute. So started about 1000 AD, lived under Polish, Russians, and Germans for centuries. It became a democratic state in 1918 at the end of World War I. And then it was free for 22 years until World War II. And then in 1940 came in the Soviets. Then in 1941 came in the Nazis. And then in 1944 again came the Soviets, and they stayed until 1990. So in 1990, it became free again. So it's been a democratic state since 1990, and it has had 32 years of freedom. I grew up in Market Park, south side of Chicago, and known as Little Lithuania. And you can see my mom. I've got my arm around my mom, and my grandmother's to her side. And you can tell it's Christmas time. So I grew up in a very Lithuanian family, as many of us did here. I spoke only Lithuanian until I was in kindergarten. And then when I was 5 years old, I started learning English. And my parents did that, like all the Lithuanian parents, to kind of inculcate the children to be Lithuanian because the country was occupied by the Soviet Union. So it was up to us to do what we could to save little Lithuania from the big bad communists. And this is how we grew up. Very briefly about the Holocaust in Lithuania. A lot of this I learned only in my research because I certainly did not know any of this before I started the book. Holocaust in Lithuania started June 22nd, 1941, when the Nazis invaded Lithuania under Operation Barbarossa. At that time, Lithuania had about 200,000 Jews, and 96.4% were murdered, most of them within the first 6 months. And Lithuania has the horrible distinction of having the highest percentage of Jews murdered in all of Europe during the Holocaust. And it was done killing by bullets, one by one, no concentration camps, no gas chambers. It was all bullets, one by one. And you see how, Lithuania is a tiny country, but it has 200 death pits of Jews scattered throughout the country in the forests where the vast majority were killed. And maybe only a handful have names of who was killed there. So when I was growing up, I had heard a lot about the Lithuanian anti-Nazi resistance. But when I did research for this book, I found out these three facts, and that was that there were only about 600 to 1,000 Nazis in Lithuania during the Nazi occupation, that many Lithuanians had guns, and that not a single Nazi was killed, but yet 200,000 Jews were killed. All right, so here's my grandfather, Jonas Nareka. I grew up worshiping him, believing that he was a big World War II hero. And he's got an amazing story, and really, he's kind of, very symbolic of the soul of Lithuania during World War II, because just about everything happened to him in his very brief life. And when my grandmother would tell me stories about her husband, she would almost always start at the end. And that was that he died in a KGB prison in 1947. And he was tortured for almost 2 years and then executed by 2 bullets and then tossed in a mass grave. And the reason he ended up in that KGB prison was because he was trying to lead a rebellion against the Soviet Union. And at that time, he called himself General Storm. He wasn't a general, he was a captain in the army, but because he was leading the effort, he gave himself the code name General Storm. So he was betrayed by someone and then taken into the KGB prison and interrogated, not allowed to sleep, very common experience. And I write about this in the book of what he went through in the KGB prison. Before that, he was in a Nazi concentration camp from 43 to 45. And I was told it was because he tried to save Jews. Before that, he was head of the Šiauliai district, which was the second largest region in Lithuania from 1941 to 1943. And before that, he led the uprising against the Soviets in 1941 from Žemaitija, or the lowlands, and they won. They got Lithuania back. They beat out the communists. Um, and then, because of all this brave fighting against the communists, he has a school and streets named after him. He's got a plaque on a famous building in Vilnius as well. So this is essentially what I grew up with believing about him. Obviously, I did not know there were big holes in his story. All that came much later. And in 1997, he received the Cross of the Vitus, which is the highest honor anyone can receive posthumously. So here's a picture of my mom getting the Cross of the Vitus for her father from President Algirdas Brazauskas at the time. And here's me and my brother, and then all these Lithuanian officials standing around. So this was a big heroic moment for my grandfather, and it just sort of underlined and emphasized, what a great hero he's considered in the country. So, as I was growing up in Chicago, my mom was working on this book about her father. So this was going to be her book. And she had been collecting all kinds of material on him and always talking about him. And I always sort of admired this big project that she had, that the Lithuanian community had asked her to do. But then in the year 2000, she was only 60 years old then. She got very, very sick. And I went to visit her in the hospital, and she did not look good. And I was sort of terrified, and it turns out for good reason. And she takes my hand and tells me, Sylvia, you have to write the book. And of course, I knew which book she was talking about, because it was the only book we all talked about, the one that she was going to write. And at first I was like, no, 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 you're going to be fine. You're going to get out of the hospital. Everything's going to be okay. But she, insisted. And so there's only one thing you can say to your mom when she does that. And I said, yes. So and within 2 weeks, she had died, because the very next day she went into a coma. And so it's like, I think I had the last conversation with her. I was alone with her, and I don't know if anyone else visited her after that, but that was it. And then she died 2 weeks later. So among the materials that she had were 3,000 pages of KGB transcripts from when he was interrogated and tortured in that KGB prison. She had 77 letters from the Stutthof concentration camp that he wrote to my grandmother, and all kinds of just other things. I have 3 bookshelves behind me, and these were all from her archives. Then my grandmother survived her. So this is a picture of my grandmother with Jonas and Areika horsing around. I think it's before they're married. And I always loved this picture. But anyway, mom died in February 2000, and then my grandmother, who I always called Mututa, died in July 2000. So now it's 5 months later, and I'm visiting her by her deathbed, and she asks me, Sylvia, how's the book? And I said, don't worry, Mututa, everything's going fine. I've started it. I've started going through the material, and I'm not going to let it go the way mom did. I was 38 years old then. And I said, I'm young, and I was a full-time journalist at the time. And I said, I'm going to get it done. And I thought I was giving her words of comfort to do it. And to my surprise, she says, don't write the book. There's no need to dig around. Just let history lie. And I had no idea why she would have said something like this to me. And I just said, but I promised mom, of course I'm going to do it. There's no way I'm not going to do it. And she just, turned in bed and faced the wall. And, I kind of got her back to me. And that was the end of the conversation. And I walked out. And I said, I said goodbye, and I walked out, and that was it. And then she went into a coma shortly after that and died within 2 weeks. So that was almost my last conversation with her as well. So they both wanted to be buried in Lithuania. And so they were cremated here, and we brought in Chicago, and then we brought their cremains to Vilnius, Lithuania, and we chose October 8th because that was my grandfather's birthday, and that would have been his 90-year memorial birthday. And it was at the Vilnius Cathedral, and then we buried them at the Santakalne Cemetery, and you could see over here to the right is Lithuania's first president, Vytautas Landsbergis. So we were like just so honored that he came and paid his respects, and we thought it was a really big deal. Then shortly after the funeral, they took us to this building, which is a building in Vilnius, and it's in walking distance from the cathedral. So we just walked there, and they gave us a big wreath of flowers to set at the building. This is where my grandfather worked, kind of running this underground resistance movement against the Soviets. And so he was there from 1945 to 46. But anyway, they had just put this plaque up like literally days before my brother's arrival, and they wanted it there for us for when we arrived there. So the plaque says, in this building, 1945-46, worked a noteworthy resistor, Lithuania's National Council and Lithuania's Armed Forces organizer and leader, Jonas Noreika General Storm, shot February 26, 1947. So that was my last moment of innocence about my grandfather, because the next day, my brother and I went to visit the school named after our grandfather, the Jonas Noreika Grammar School. And you can see in this middle part, there's a sign for how to get to his school. It says J. Noreiko's Gimtinė, or his birthplace, 1 kilometer away. So it's like a tourist attraction already. And so anyway, we get there, and it's a very modest school, white brick building, oak trim, and nothing fancy. But the children were there, and they were holding flowers, and they were singing these Lithuanian folk songs, and it was very moving. And then we go inside to the director's office, and we start talking. And he says, "Oh, I heard you're writing this book about Jonas Noreika. I heard you took the project over from your mom." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're such a good daughter for doing this. Our country really needs its heroes." And I said, "Thank you." And I said, "As long as I'm here, why don't you let me know how you named the school after my grandfather?" Because I had never really heard the story. And he said, "Well, before 1990, we had this horrible Russian name because we were occupied by the Russians and we had no choice. And as soon as we got our independence, we wanted a good patriotic Lithuanian name. And so we decided to name the school after your grandfather because he's such a hero." And I thought, okay, well, I thought that was the end of the story. He was born in this town, and it's a small town. And so I thought that was the end of the story. And then he takes me to the side and he says, "But I got a lot of grief over naming the school after your grandfather." And I said, "Grief from who?" And he says, "The Jews." And I said, "What could the Jews possibly say about my wonderful, magnificent, legendary grandfather whom I love so much?" And he looks at me like I'm the idiot, and he says, "Well, he was accused of killing Jews." And he said it as if it was like such common knowledge, and how come I didn't know it? And anyway, this was like one of the biggest shocks of my life. I was very naive, completely unprepared for it, had no idea, kind of felt ambushed by the whole thing. And I, felt like someone punched me in the gut. And I had to literally sit down and kind of catch my breath because this was a big blow to me. But then he sort of takes my arm and he's like, rubbing it. And he says, "But don't worry, that's all in the past. everybody's happy now that the school is named after your grandfather. And he says it's just communist propaganda. It's not true. So I go back home to Chicago and I start asking everybody around here, like my father and, his friends. And I'm like, have you ever heard this crazy rumor of Jonas Noreka killing Jews? And they said, yeah, we heard it. And I said, what? How come nobody ever told me this? And they said, well, it's just communist propaganda. They don't want Lithuania to have any heroes. They don't want Lithuania to become a strong country because someday they're going to take it over again. And it's not true. And they're just making up horrible things about anybody who's a Lithuanian hero. So why do we talk about it if it's a lie? And I'm a Lithuanian in Chicago. That's what all Lithuanians in Chicago believed. And so that's what I believed for almost 10 years. But because I was a journalist, I knew I couldn't just completely ignore this rumor, much as I wanted to. I knew that I would have to address it in some way. And so I began to fantasize that maybe I could exonerate my grandfather from this crazy rumor and set it to rest once and for all. So that was my goal. And that at least tricked me into finally taking a look at this Nazi occupation. And I guess I have to explain that to Lithuanians, the Nazi occupation was just 3 years, and the Soviet occupation was 50 years. So all of our attention is always on the Soviet occupation because that's the one that has been for so long, and the Nazi occupation was not that long. Also, it was not as devastating to Lithuanians as it was obviously to the Jews. So anyway, in my mom's archives, I noticed that like 99.9% of all of our information is on the Soviet occupation. And there's very, very little there on the Nazi occupation. And, but I went through her archives again. And then I came across this document called Pakalkalva Lietuve, written by my grandfather. And it's a little 32-page booklet. And it means raise your head Lithuanian. And it has since been called the Lithuanian Mein Kampf. He wrote it in 1933, and I do believe he must have read Hitler's Mein Kampf because that was written in 1926 or so. So, and my grandfather could read German, and I think he was influenced by it, as was much of Europe. And so here are some quotes from this booklet. It basically calls for an economic boycott of anything Jewish in Lithuanian. And here's just 4 quotes. I mean, it's 32 pages, and I just kind of randomly picked 4 to give you a sense of the flavor of this. Jews in nice clothes sit in cafes thinking how to extract from us as much money as possible. The Jew gives you to earn, but he will find an opportunity to steal from you 3 times more. Once and forever, do not buy anything from the Jews. Remember, when you sell a big thing to a Jew, you are doing harm. You are harming your brother, an ethnic Lithuanian. If all ethnic Lithuanians had an agreement to boycott the Jew, life would be much better. Yes, yes, indeed. So, as his granddaughter, I wanted to burn this thing. And I was thinking, my gosh, this is certainly going to make it much harder for me to exonerate Jonas Noreka. But you can't see it, but right around here in pencil, my grandmother had written 22-year-old young man in Lithuanian, 22 metų vyrukas. And it was like as if I could see her ghost appear to me. And in my imagination, she was telling me he was just 22. He was just a hothead. Everybody was anti-Semitic in Europe at that time. This was, nothing different for a non-Jew. And it's not like he called for killing them. He was just calling for the economic boycott. So I sort of thought I had a little sliver of hope, and I still thought that maybe there is some chance that he's still innocent. But all of that was dashed when I came across this document. And this document was so devastating to me that I'm going to read it to you from my book, because this is the thing that turned me completely around and finally made me believe that there was much more to this rumor than it being just a rumor. He was head of the Cholet district during the Nazi occupation, and he was 30 years old when he got that position. So, very young man to even get that position. But anyway, um, within weeks of getting that position, on August 22nd, 1941, he calls for the rounding up of all Jews and half Jews, sending them to a ghetto in Żagarie, a ghetto that he wanted newly created in Żagarie, which is a little tiny town in northern Lithuania that is on the border of Latvia. And it turns out that more than 2,000 Jews were rounded up, all ages, babies, children, grandmothers, grandfathers, the whole gamut. Didn't matter. There were no exemptions. And it didn't take me long to discover that they were all slaughtered within 2 months. And the date chosen for their slaughter was Yom Kippur. So I'm going to read this document because for me it was so pivotal. And it's one of the strongest pieces of evidence that he played such a role in the Holocaust. He had a very powerful position. He was the highest ranking Lithuanian under a Nazi in that region. And this is just one of the documents that he wrote. It's the worst one. There are other ones, and this is definitely the most devastating and the worst. So it says, I'm reading from the book, and I'm on page 109. I don't know if any of you have the book and you want to read along. Sorry, I'm the English teacher and kind of letting you in on this. So it says, Cholet City and County Governor, August 22nd, 1941, number 962. To all chiefs of principalities of the Cholet County and burgomasters of secondary towns, copy for police precinct chiefs. By decree of Cholet District Commissioner, all citizens of Jewish ethnicity, including half-Jews, must be removed from all principalities and towns of the county and settled in one district, the ghetto. All Jewish property must be preserved and accounted for by municipalities. In accordance with this decree, 1. Jews of all principalities, secondary towns, and townships must be moved to the town of Żagarie in the period of the 25th to the 29th of this month. Requisites for resettlement will be provided by respective municipalities. 2. Lists of abandoned Jewish property must be delivered to me in 2 copies by August 29. Resettled Jews can take the most necessary household items and clothes and up to 200 Reichsmarks in cash for each Jewish family. 3. In Żagarie, all Jews will be settled in a separate district which has to be fenced off by August 30th. Fencing off the ghetto district will be taken care of by the Żagarie municipality. Every day, district Jews in the ghetto will be conveyed to work and back to the ghetto by guards. 4. Non-Jewish citizens of the district appointed for the Jews are allowed to choose other locations in the county. If any of those non-Jews who are resettled have to abandon their real estate, they are allowed to choose real estate of corresponding value abandoned by the Jews in Żagarie or other townships. 5. Chiefs and burgomasters are obliged to inform me on the execution of this decree by the 29th of this month, including information on what has been accomplished and how many Jews have been resettled. The burgomaster of Żagarie must inform me how many Jews have been resettled to Żagarie. Jonas Noreka, signature, city and county governor. So this was the document that I took very seriously. It's a primary source document. His signature's at the bottom. That was his position. And so this to me left no doubt of his role in this. Lithuanians, however, in Lithuania have a completely different read on this document, which I get into in this book, and I'll get a little bit into this in the presentation. But essentially, everybody's in denial over the significance of this document. So I was researching and writing until 2018. I spent 7 weeks in Lithuania in the summer of 2013, talking to a lot of people, going through a lot of documents. And my grandfather's was head of the Cholet district from August 41 to March 1943. During that time, he wrote 1,000 orders, and of those orders, 70 had to do with the Holocaust. And one of the defenses for him is that he was just a translator, and it turns out that of those 70, only 3 were written by Germans. So he did translate 3 of them, but the rest just were straight into Lithuanian to be given to the other Lithuanians to follow the orders. So in my research, I found that he gave orders to kill 2,000 Jews in Plunge by mid-July 1941, 2,000 in Tolche, and 4,000 in Cholet. So he contributed to about 8,000 to 15,000 deaths under his watch. He didn't shoot any Jews himself. This is another big defense of him, that he didn't really have any Jewish blood on his hands because he didn't do the shooting personally. But this still makes him a desk murderer. While I was in Lithuania, I'd hired a Holocaust guide. And this is Simas Dovidavičius, and he is standing in front of the Holocaust Museum in Vilnius. And you know, I had a friend, I have a friend who used to work for the Sun-Times, Howard Walensky, and he called me in 2012, and he said, you know, I just came back from a trip to Lithuania, and it was a Holocaust tour. And in 2012, I'm like, what is a Holocaust tour? I never heard of this. And he said, it's, well, you hire a guide, and he takes you to the places where he thinks your family members were murdered, his best guess, and then we go and pray Kaddish over it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Howard, I never heard of this. This sounds so sad. He said, I know, it is, but it's a lot of Jews do this. And I'm like, you know, I was really, really affected by the story, and I could, you know, I started picturing his family kind of going from one mud pit to another mud pit and wondering who's there and praying their prayers. And I was very affected by the story. And then I called him up a few days later and I said, Howard, I have an idea. What if I call your Holocaust guide and ask him to take me to places where maybe Jonas Noreka was involved in killing Jews? And Howard said, wow, Sylvia, that's a really crazy idea. It's so crazy, it's good though. So he helped me get in touch with Simon. And at first, Simon didn't want to do it because, you know, I'm the granddaughter of a perpetrator, and he lost many relatives in Lithuania. And he didn't have the stomach for it. But then he started kind of researching my grandfather. And a few weeks later, he contacts me and he says, you know what, your grandfather's a very interesting man, and I'm getting kind of mesmerized by his story. Now I can't let it go. Are you still interested in working together? And I said, yes, very much. So then he changed his mind, and then we started working together. So I talk about Simon a lot in the book, and he really was so helpful to me in kind of getting the Jewish perspective of what happened in the Holocaust to Lithuania, because you can't get this perspective from a regular Lithuanian. You just can't. And it was under his urging, that I interview the director of the Genocide Center of Lithuania. And their mission is to study the genocides of Lithuania. And of course, that includes the Jewish genocide, and they call what happened by the Soviets also a genocide to Lithuanians. But it's a spiritual genocide. So a big difference. And anyway, most of their focus is on the Soviet occupation and very little is on the Nazi occupation. And they're the ones who declared my grandfather a hero. So anyway, I interviewed this then director, Teresa Broskaita, and I asked her, what about this document that my grandfather signed, sending 2,000 Jews to their death in Jagadeh? What do you make of that? And how come he can still be a hero? And her answer was so indicative of just how most Lithuanians think. And she said, it's hard to know what he really felt in his heart when he signed that document. And, you know, I was trained as a journalist at Northwestern University, and, a primary source document with the man's signature, means that he knew what he was signing. And so, but in Lithuania, they just kind of all fall over themselves, making excuse after excuse for him because they just cannot believe that he knew what he was signing. So, and then she said, we presume that he's innocent. That's what you do in the United States, don't you? So, I just kind of ended the interview after that, but I thought it was, I kind of got what I needed because I really got an answer that just revealed how the thinking goes there. And I want to point out that this is the center that studies the Soviet occupation. Oh, wait, I wanted to show you. Now I can't go back. Ah! And look how small the Holocaust Museum is to study the Holocaust. So it's like the disparity between the two occupations is a really big deal in Lithuania. Jews notice it right away. Lithuanians notice it after a Jew points it out. So anyway, the other big thing in Lithuania is that Žydšaudžiai are the guilty ones, and this means Jew shooters. So if you didn't have a gun and personally Jewish shoot a Jew, they think you're innocent. And of course, the Žydšaudžiai, the ones that they found were drunk, degenerate, uneducated, and every Lithuanian family has heard about them, and it's an open secret. And they were really ostracized in Lithuania, even during the Soviet occupation. If somebody knew that somebody else was a Žydšaudis, they were sort of, not treated well. But I was asked to go to Lithuania last October and give a seminar to teachers teaching their students about the Holocaust. And I really wanted to drive home the idea of the genocide machine in Lithuania. And this was all new to them. So anyway, I put up a slide like this, and I said to these teachers, who is the guiltiest in the genocide machine? And I said, because it wasn't just one person who committed this Jewish genocide. It was really very, very many people in the country, and it couldn't have been done without the Lithuanians. So of course, at the top, I put Hitler and the Nazi propaganda. Then there was the provisional government, and they called for the cleansing of the Jews. And the Lithuanian Activist Front, which was a militia group, called for the cleansing of the Jews. Then there were Nazis who wrote orders to segregate and round up Jews. Then there were Lithuanians who translated the Nazi orders, like my grandfather. Then there were Lithuanians who had to go to these towns and identify the Jews. Then there were Lithuanians who had to round them up. Then there were Lithuanians who had to guard the Jews in the ghetto or the prison. There were Lithuanians then there were Lithuanians who distributed the Jewish property. Lithuanians who took Jews to the pits. Lithuanians who took Jewish property. And then there were finally the Lithuanians who shot the Jews. And I asked these teachers, I said, so who's the guiltiest? Go into groups and discuss. And so they go in their groups, and it doesn't take more than a minute for them to start raising their hands and say, they're all guilty. So that was my big moment of hope that Lithuanians can be logical if you try. And so they really showed, this was a big aha moment for them in that little classroom with those 30 teachers. This was a big moment for them. So anyway, I finished the book, And then in 2018, I needed to find a literary agent so I could find a publisher, and I got my website up. And within days, I get an email from a researcher in Lithuania saying he works for a man by the name of Grant Goshen, who is a Litvak, a Lithuanian Jew now living in California. And he lost 100 relatives in the Holocaust because of my grandfather, Jonas Noreika. And he was suing the Genocide Center uh, for Holocaust distortion, for defending the good name of Jonas Noreika. And now this lawsuit is in the United Nations. So anyway, this researcher who contacted me and told me about Grant suggested I contact Grant. And I was really scared to contact him because I didn't know, what he was like and how he would receive me. And anyway, long story short, I did contact him, and we did talk, and we actually became very good friends. And now we talk about the story together. We appear on Zooms together too on this, and I kind of talk about how I was researching about my grandfather and how he was researching about my grandfather separately. For almost, I started in 2000, he started like in 2010, and then we finally met in 2018. And then after that, we started getting a lot of media attention because of that too. So anyway, then in 2019, the Stanislavas Tomas, who was running for the European Parliament, kind of had a publicity stunt. And his stunt was to get on a ladder and smash my grandfather's plaque. And he did. He took a sledgehammer and he smashed it 14 times, and then it all scattered down into little pieces. Well, sometimes when I have interactive Zooms, I'll ask, and what do you think happened next? And then I'll get all kinds of guesses. So I'm just going to cut to the chase. They put up a new and improved plaque, bigger and better than before, because that's what Lithuanians do. So that's how it is. Anyway, I have concluded that Lithuania is in the 10th stage of genocide. They're in denial. They say Lithuanians had nothing to do with killing Jews. They were just all innocent bystanders standing by, wringing their hands, and it was all done by the German Nazis. So since my book has come out, it's gotten a lot of international coverage. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, BBC, Chicago Tribune. It came out in Spanish in 2020. It came out in English last year, March 2021. And it just came out in Lithuanian in February. And it's called Vetra Lieto Šalyje, or Storm in the Land of Rain, which was my original title. It's coming out in Polish and Hungarian. And the English paperback is coming out June 7th, and they're taking my original title, Storm in the Land of Rain, a memoir. A mother's dying wish becomes her daughter's nightmare. So that is the end of my talk. Okay.
Wow. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I think it's left me a little breathless, even though I saw it. I've actually seen it last week. And so it's an amazing opportunity to hear the story again. And again, I just feel really blown away by the journey that you took, and by your willingness to pursue the truth and to share the truth. And, like you said, to pick a moment of pain, or many moments of pain, and obstacles you have overcome, and to share that with us. It's an incredible gift. So I know that there are questions, and so I want to turn things over to I'm gonna facilitate the questions, but I want to turn things over to the people who are here who have questions. And it will come as no surprise that I am going to start with Mark and Marcia for the first questions. And if you have a question, you should either raise your hand using the emoji, or you can write me in the chat and I'll call on you to ask the question.
So many questions. So I think you were incredibly brave following this through and pursuing it. And obviously not being terribly welcomed in your pursuit of the truth there. So a couple of questions. I'm just wondering, first of all, if the lawsuit is continuing. And now that the book has been translated into Lithuanian, have you heard any reactions? And similarly, how is the Chicago Lithuanian community treating you these days?
What was the first one?
Well, in terms of, is the lawsuit still proceeding?
Oh, the lawsuit, yeah. The lawsuit did not get anywhere in Lithuania, and then it went to the European Court Commission, and it's like our Supreme Court, and they don't have to take every single case, and they did not take this case. So it was never even looked at. And now it's in front of the United Nations. So I don't know what's going to happen in the United Nations. Grant is not giving up. He's probably going to take this to his death, knowing Grant. So that is somehow, some way, shape, or form is going to continue. I don't know how. The book coming out in Lithuania was a big, wonderful surprise to me. I used to joke with my friends that this book is going to come out in every language but Lithuanian. So when a Lithuanian publisher took it, I was really ecstatic. And it is not the majority viewpoint, but there is enough of a minority viewpoint, I guess, to interest people. I have been told, that all the politicians are aware of it, that all the members of Seimas, their parliament, is aware of it if they haven't read it. I am getting good support from some very influential people in Lithuania. So that part's the good news. The bad news is there's still a lot of, very strong, like, ultra nationalism, I guess, against it, and they're calling me a traitor, a KGB spy, and all kinds of other things. And so that's how that is. In Chicago, also mixed bag. I have some, friends and of people, reaching out to me and saying, this is great. I'm so happy you're doing it. But they don't want to go public with it, with their support. And essentially, I'm getting the cold shoulder in Lithuania, here in Chicago. So just trying to they're just wishing it would go away. And, on the one hand, I kind of get the denial part of it because I went through it myself. So I know how it took me alone 10 years to get through it. So I don't know if it's going to take, 10 years for the rest of the Lithuanians to catch up with it. So that's sort of the lay of the land.
Thank you.
The next person is Roberta Cooperman, and then Mark Menzer. I'll go to you next. So Roberta.
Yes, we had a pre-book discussion this afternoon, and a lot of discussion went on regarding your grandmother didn't want you to write it. So our sense was, yes, she knew about it. And then we had mixed, people in our group had mixed feelings if your mother knew or didn't know, or what do you think her, and you don't have to answer this question, obviously, you don't have to answer anything that you don't want to, but what do you think your mother's motivation was to have you write the book? Do you think she knew? Do you think she wanted you to exonerate your grandfather?
My guess is, I believe my grandmother knew. So I think she was trying to stop me from writing the book. So that is my belief too. My mom was 2 years old in 1941. So I think she got as far as the denial. Like she got as far as hearing the rumor, and then that was it. I think she just stopped there, and I think she was hoping I would have exonerated him, is my guess.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Menzer.
Yes, thank you. So you cited at least a couple of documents. One was what you call the Lithuanian Mein Kampf, and then the other one was that edict to round up the Jews. Were those either of those in your mom's collection, or did you get those after your mom died?
They were in my mom's collection. And this is why I always say that this is more of a psychological issue than a historical issue. They were there, but I didn't see them until I was ready to see them. And then when I was ready to see them, I found them. I cannot explain that. It's some kind of a mystery, but really they were there. And I just didn't, one was a book, one was in a book, and I saved all the World War II books. Like I thought I would do that later. So I went through everything else. I went through the KGB transcripts, 3,000 pages first. That took me years because it was in Lithuanian. And my Lithuanian's good, but it's not like my English now. And so I had to use a Lithuanian American dictionary for a lot of it to kind of get it. And then I went through all the 77 letters that he wrote to my grandmother, these love letters. And that was a beautiful part of the project. And he wrote a fairy tale to my mom too, which was also, so all that took years and years too. And then I was going through the newspaper and magazine articles about him. And it was kind of hidden in between that when I found it. And then I was going through the books, and that's where I found that document in the book. So that's kind of how those were in my, and so those things have been around for Lithuanians a long time too. But unless you want to see it, you're not going to see it. It could be right there in front of you.
Well, thank you for this amazing work. You must have been times when you thought that you didn't want to go through with it. I'm glad
There
you did.
were.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Judy.
Yes, I want to applaud your courage, I think. And I think it's the Times that says you have to report without fear or favor. And that certainly seems to be what you have done. I am wondering if you have, and you survived, I'm wondering, we have so many people in our country now afraid of history and afraid of what they might learn. And you went and you faced it. And I wonder if you have any words of advice for people who are afraid of finding out what happened in the past.
I don't know, it's I had this deathbed promise, and so I had to write, it's a constellation of so many strange factors that there's no way I would have done this unless my mom had willed me to do this on her deathbed. And that was such a strong force for me that I couldn't say no. Like I couldn't just drop it. So that not everybody has this deathbed promise they have to fulfill to dig into their family's history. And so, I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for that. I really wouldn't have, because there was no reason for me to do it. So I just kind of had this moral obligation because I told Mom, yes, I have to do it now. It wasn't the book she would have wanted me to write. That was a whole other thing. But by that point, I was so knee deep, neck deep into it that I just couldn't turn around anymore. So then I just kept going forward. And I had to do a lot of soul searching and deciding, and in the end, I'm religious, Catholic, and I gave it up to God. And I just said, God, if this is true, you are going to have to help me with this, because I am just one little person here, against the whole government of Lithuania and the whole history of Lithuania. And who am I to think I'm going to change it? So I'll show up and write and do the best I can, but you're going to have to help me with everything else. That was my deal with God.
Thank you.
I love that question, Judy. I really do, because it's, this is like what so many of us are grappling with, that, and what to do with that. That, there are in so many of our own stories, the story of our country, the story of a lot of different places, there's something, there are things that happen that should not have, and how do we handle that? And I agree, this book is a beautiful way of, of kind of moving through something really, really awful, but honoring the truth. Is just so incredibly powerful. Bela, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Again, I want to echo what everyone else has been saying about your courage in completing this work, and in facing the truth that must have been very difficult for you to do. And you always had the choice not to do it. That's what I kept remembering when I was reading it, and you kept persisting on in continuing. I think I have to agree that it was very brave of you to do that, and it's brave of you now to continue to talk about it and to confront the truth. But I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned it, about the fairy tale. A lot of us, when we were talking about the book this afternoon, we're curious about did you see something in that, some meaning in that? Or did you include it just because it was something that he wrote and that you thought it should be included, or was there something that you wanted us to see in the fairy tale?
There's a lot of things I guess I wanted you to see. One is that it was just such a soulful human side of him, and it was a beautiful fairy tale, and this is the side of him that covers up the horrible side of him. And so, humans are so complex, and they're not just one-sided villains. And this beautiful fairy tale, I grew up with my mom reading this fairy tale to me, and I learned to love my grandfather in a way because of this fairy tale. And the fairy tale is an allegory to me of the Nazis and the Soviets taking over Lithuania, and the bad witch being the bad guy. And later, little Anita, like the little girl who kind of is going through, he doesn't end it, so it's kind of left all unended. But little Anita was my mom, and then in some ways I thought it was me. You start identifying with that character. Just for a while I was going to weave that fairy tale through the whole book, but then in the end came that genocide center, and that was much more powerful. And then we decided just to put the fairy tale at the end. So I was, and in my head, the whole denial of Lithuania over the Holocaust is a big fairy tale too.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about is how it's like when we learn about some of these other Nazi leaders and how they loved classical music and ballet and art, and then they could still do the things that they did. It's absolutely true. It's the complexity of human beings, that they're able to do something so terrible on one hand and something so beautiful on the other. We're really strange creatures, aren't we?
I know, that's what fascinated me so much about it. How could such an educated man at such a high level, who was a creative writer on top of being a lawyer and a soldier, do something so evil?
Thank you.
Are there any other questions before we conclude? I want to be sensitive to time, but I know that there were. Marcia, did we cover all of the major questions from this afternoon, or do you want to maybe ask one last question?
Yeah, I've got one more.
Okay,
We got through most of it, and you've addressed a lot of it just in your talk. But that fellow that originally was helping you, that was a colleague of your grandfather's, Demi Jonas?
Oh, Demi Jonas, yeah.
Yeah. Is he still alive? Does he know the outcome of your work?
No, he passed away 2 or 3 years ago. So he never saw the book. I did tell him, as much as I could over the phone, but I didn't show him the manuscript and and I did confront him, but he never saw it. I didn't even have a publisher yet by the time he died, so he didn't know.
Thank you. Okay.
Judy, last question, and then we'll bring things to a close.
Perhaps this is in the book and I didn't see it, but do you have a relationship with any Holocaust museum in this country or in Israel, giving them this material? Because I think that would be a really appropriate place.
Yeah, I signed a contract with the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to hand over my whole archive to them in 10 years, 9 years now.
Wow.
Good, I'll plan to see it.
Good question. Wow.
That is a great question, and wow. So the book is called The Nazis' Granddaughter, How I Discovered My Father Was a War Criminal. As you saw,
Grandfather.
sorry, what did I say?
I said father.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Just
Boy, it
kidding.
didn't slip, Rabbi.
Nazis' Granddaughter, boy, How I Discovered My Grandfather Was a War Criminal. It's coming out in paper book, and that title is going to be
Storm in the Land of Rain.
Storm in the Land of Rain. I also know, Silvia, you said you're going to Israel in 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks. What you want to just tell us what you're doing there? And because
I'll be leaving May 12th and coming back May 20th, and I was invited by the Israeli Lithuanian community there to talk to them.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's just, this is a story that, you tell a story and, and it changes people, and you never know how it will touch people. But obviously this story has touched so many people, profoundly and deeply, and has given us so much to think about, especially, at this time of year for the Jewish people. Although really, it's never far from our thoughts. The Holocaust is never far from our thoughts. The 6 million more are part of, are part of who we are and the way we walk through the world. We carry their memories with us. And we are grateful for your willingness to be a truth teller in a world that all too often lately seems to be denying the truth about lots of different stories. This is one that we can never forget. And I extend such a profound and deep gratitude for you and the work that you did to help add to the truth of the story of what happened, so that we can carry out the promise that we have made, that this should never happen again. So with that being said, friends, I hope that you will recommend this book to your friends if you haven't read it already. If you have read it already, or if you haven't, to pick it up. I will be sending out a link with this talk if you'd like to share it with friends, and also a link for you to buy the book on Amazon.com. A great way that you can help promote the book is by putting a review on Goodreads or a review on Amazon.com. Of course, by the way, it's our preference that you buy the book from a local independent bookstore in Port Washington. That would be the Dolphin. But if you can't get it there, and they can always order it for you, by the way, and pick it up on Amazon and write a positive review. So thank you, thank you so much, Ms. Foti. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll see you all soon. Good night.
Good night.